Mom, why does Dad have my real birth certificate hidden in his briefcase when you said I was adopted? Marcus asked during dinner, sliding the document across the table. As I turned to my husband of 28 years, as his face turned white with panic. The dining room seemed to tilt like the foundation of my entire understanding of motherhood was crumbling beneath me. The same hands that had protected vulnerable children for 35 years as a pediatric nurse began shaking as I stared at the birth certificate showing Raymond Patterson as father and some woman named Linda Morrison as mother. Not the adoption agency story I'd believed for 17 years. Around me, our kitchen buzzed with the normalcy of Sunday dinner. Homework scattered on the counter. Raymond's coffee growing cold. The family photos that now felt like elaborate lies covering every surface. Raymond, what is this? I whispered, holding up the document that was destroying everything I thought I knew about our family. Renee, that's not what it looks like, Raymond stammered. But his voice carried the panic of someone whose perfect deception had just been exposed by his own son. It looks like Marcus isn't adopted. It looks like you're his biological father, and you've been lying to me for 17 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked between us with the expression of a teenager who'd been carrying adult secrets for too long, while Raymond stared at the birth certificate like evidence of a crime he'd thought was perfectly hidden. My name is Irene Patterson. I'm 61 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered my husband Raymond had been systematically deceiving me while I funded his lies. He thought my maternal instincts made me blind, that my nursing background made me gullible about family dynamics, that my love for Marcus made me an easy target. But what he didn't know was that the same pediatric expertise that had protected children for 35 years was about to expose his coordinated betrayal and help me reclaim my independence in ways he never saw coming. If this situation resonates with your soul, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Marcus, how long have you known about this? I asked, my voice taking on the professional authority I'd used when advocating for child patience. Since I was 12, Mom. I found it when I was looking for my social security card for a school project. Dad caught me and made me promise never to tell you. Made him promise. Raymond had been using our son, his biological son, as a co-conspirator in deceiving me about the most fundamental aspect of our family structure. Raymond, who is Linda Morrison? I asked, studying the birth certificate with the analytical eye I'd developed from decades of reviewing medical records. She was someone I knew before we got married, Raymond replied, but his voice lacked conviction. It was a mistake, Renee, a one-time thing. But it gets worse. Marcus, if you've known for 5 years, why are you telling me now? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Because Dad's doing it again, Mom. He's with my guidance counselor, Miss Chen, and she's pregnant. They're planning to move to Florida together, and Dad's been taking money from the account Grandma left for my college to pay for it. The words hit like a series of physical blows. Not only had Raymond lied about Marcus's adoption, but he was conducting another affair with our son's guidance counselor, while stealing the inheritance my mother had left, specifically for Marcus's education. $380,000, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. That's what my mother had left for Marcus's future. Money she'd saved from her teaching pension because she believed I'd adopted a child who needed support. Money that Raymond had apparently been stealing to fund his escape with his pregnant affair partner. Miss Chen has been sabotaging my college applications too, Mom. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. She's been changing my grades in the computer system and not submitting my scholarship applications. She wants me to fail so Dad can start fresh with their new baby. The cruelty was breathtaking. Not only was Raymond conducting an affair with our son's guidance counselor, but she'd been using her professional position to destroy Marcus's educational future while carrying Raymond's child. Raymond, is this true? I asked, my voice carrying the protective authority I'd used when confronting parents who abused their children. Renee, you're overreacting. Marcus is just upset about some college rejections. I'm not overreacting, Dad, Marcus interrupted, pulling out his phone. I have screenshots of the grade changes and text messages between you and Ms. Chen about getting rid of me so your new family can start clean. Getting rid of him. They'd been planning to eliminate Marcus from Raymond's life entirely, using educational sabotage and financial theft to ensure he had no future that might interfere with their new relationship. Marcus, why are you protecting me instead of your father? I asked, though the answer was already breaking my heart. Because you're the only real parent I've ever had, Mom. You stayed up with me when I was sick, helped with homework, celebrated every achievement. Dad just provided DNA. You provided love. The validation and devastation hit simultaneously. This child I'd loved for 17 years was choosing me over his biological father, but only because that father had been systematically betraying both of us while planning to abandon us for his new family. Raymond, I want to see every bank statement, every withdrawal record, every piece of documentation about Marcus's inheritance, I said, my voice taking on the fierce protectiveness I'd used when fighting for vulnerable children. The man who'd spent 17 years manipulating my maternal instincts while conducting affairs and stealing inheritance money looked like someone whose perfect family fraud had just been exposed by the child he'd been planning to abandon. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly how fierce pediatric nurses become when protecting children, even when those children turn out to be their husband's biological sons who choose love over genetics. The next morning, I sat in my home office, surrounded by 17 years of family documents, medical records, and financial statements that were revealing themselves as evidence of systematic deception and inheritance theft. The same methodical approach I'd used to track patient care for 35 years was now exposing the conspiracy that had stolen my understanding of motherhood and my family's financial future. Every adoption anniversary celebration, every time Raymond had handled Marcus's medical appointments while I worked, every mysterious expense that didn't match our family budget, he'd been maintaining the adoption lie while conducting affairs and stealing the inheritance money my mother had left for Marcus's education. I pulled out Marcus's medical records from the past 17 years, documentation I'd kept meticulously as a pediatric nurse. The pattern was devastating. Every time I'd questioned inconsistencies in Marcus's adoption story, Raymond had immediately provided explanations that made me doubt my own professional instincts. But it gets worse. I found my financial records and cross-referenced them with Marcus's educational expenses. March 2023, I deposited my mother's inheritance check for $380,000 into Marcus's college fund. April 2023, Raymond made the first emergency withdrawal of $15,000 for what he claimed were unexpected adoption legal fees. June 2023, another $25,000 withdrawal for Marcus's special tutoring needs that I now realized were payments to fund his affair with Wilma Chen. They'd been timing the inheritance theft around fabricated emergencies related to Marcus's adoption and education, using my maternal devotion to justify stealing money meant for his future. My phone rang, interrupting my investigation. Mrs. Patterson, this is Principal Williams from Marcus's school. We need to discuss some concerns about his academic performance and college applications. What kind of concerns, Principal Williams? Well, Ms. Chen has reported some troubling behavioral issues and grade inconsistencies. She's recommended that Marcus might not be ready for college-level work and should consider alternative paths. Alternative paths? Wilma had been systematically destroying Marcus's academic reputation to justify his failure, while stealing the money meant to fund his education. Principal Williams, I'm a pediatric nurse with 35 years of experience. Marcus has never shown behavioral problems or academic difficulties. What specific issues has Ms. Chen documented? She's reported missed appointments, disrespectful behavior, and concerns about his home environment. She seems very worried about his family stability. Family stability. While conducting an affair with my husband and sabotaging my son's future, Wilma had been portraying our family as dysfunctional to justify her educational sabotage. After I hung up, I called my former colleague Janet, who'd worked with me in pediatric nursing for 20 years. Janet, I need to ask you something confidential. Over the years, when I've discussed Marcus's development, did anything seem inconsistent with typical adoption scenarios? Renee, I'm glad you're finally asking, Janet said, her voice heavy with sympathy. How long have you known? My stomach dropped. Known what? About Marcus's resemblance to Raymond, about the medical history inconsistencies. Renee, we've all been wondering when you'd figure out that Marcus wasn't actually adopted. We've all been wondering. My own professional colleagues had recognized that Marcus's adoption story was medically inconsistent, but they'd assumed I was choosing to handle it privately. Janet, why didn't anyone say anything? Because you're a pediatric expert, Renee. We assumed that if anyone would recognize biological parentage, it would be you. We thought you knew, and were protecting Marcus from some complicated family situation. The irony was devastating. My professional expertise had made people trust Raymond's deception more, not less, because they assumed I would have detected any lies about Marcus's parentage. But it gets worse. I drove to Marcus's school that afternoon, using my healthcare credentials to access his educational records. What I found made my hands shake with rage. Wilma had been systematically altering Marcus's grades, changing A's to C's, and documenting false behavioral incidents to justify his academic decline. The school secretary, Mrs. Chen, approached me with obvious concern. Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry about Marcus's recent struggles. Mrs. Chen has been working so hard to help him, but she's mentioned that his home situation might be affecting his performance. Home situation. While conducting an affair with my husband and carrying his child, Wilma had been telling school staff that our family was dysfunctional and affecting Marcus's academic performance. Mrs. Chen, can you show me the original grade reports before Miss Chen's modifications? I'm not supposed to, but... Mrs. Patterson, I've been concerned about some of the changes Miss Chen has been making. Marcus's original grades were excellent, but she keeps adjusting them downward and adding behavioral notes that don't match what other teachers report. I called my attorney, Margaret Chen, who'd handled my mother's estate. Margaret, I need to discuss systematic inheritance theft and educational fraud. Renee, what's happened? My husband has been stealing the inheritance my mother left for Marcus's education while conducting an affair with Marcus's guidance counselor, who's been sabotaging his academic future to eliminate him as competition for their new family. Jesus, Renee, how much evidence do you have? 17 years of documentation showing systematic deception about Marcus's parentage, financial records proving inheritance theft, and educational records showing deliberate academic sabotage by a school official. That evening, Raymond came home with his usual concerned expression. How was your day, sweetheart? Marcus seemed upset about his college rejections. College rejections. The failures that Wilma had orchestrated by sabotaging his applications while Raymond stole the money meant to fund his education. I'm feeling very clear about Marcus's academic situation, Raymond. Clearer than I've been in years. That's good, but you know how competitive college admissions are these days. Maybe Marcus should consider community college first. Community college. So Marcus would stay local and dependent while Raymond and Wilma escaped to Florida with their new baby and his stolen inheritance money. Raymond, I've been reviewing Marcus's educational records. The grade changes and behavioral reports don't match any pattern I've seen in 35 years of pediatric nursing. His face went pale. Renee, you're overthinking things. Sometimes teenagers just struggle academically. Teenagers don't struggle when their guidance counselors systematically sabotage their futures, Raymond. And husbands don't steal inheritance money meant for their biological son's education. For the first time in 17 years, Raymond looked genuinely afraid. The confident man who'd been maintaining elaborate lies about adoption and inheritance looked like someone whose perfect deception had been exposed by the woman whose professional expertise he'd systematically underestimated. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that maternal love would override 35 years of pediatric training in recognizing when children were being systematically abused, even when that abuse came from their own guidance counselors and biological fathers. That afternoon at Marcus's school, I spread 17 years of educational records across Principal Williams's desk under the same fluorescent lights where I'd attended countless parent conferences. But this time, instead of celebrating academic achievements, I was analyzing evidence of systematic educational sabotage that had nearly destroyed my son's future. "Mrs. Patterson, these grade alterations are impossible to explain," Principal Williams said, his voice tight with professional concern. "No student's performance declines this dramatically without external interference. Someone has been deliberately sabotaging Marcus's academic record." I leaned forward, studying the documentation with the same analytical eye that had built my pediatric nursing reputation. "Principal Williams, look at the timing. Every grade change corresponds with periods when I was working extra shifts and couldn't attend school meetings. So you're saying Miss Chen was targeting times when you weren't present to witness Marcus's actual performance?" "I'm saying Wilma Chen has been systematically destroying Marcus's educational future while conducting an affair with my husband and carrying his child." But as I sat in that familiar office, surrounded by evidence I'd been unknowingly documenting for years, something clicked into place that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about the affair or even the inheritance theft. "Principal Williams, can you pull up the timeline when Marcus's behavioral problems started escalating?" He scrolled through the computer records. "Looks like the major documentation began about 8 months ago. Why?" 8 months ago. 2 weeks after I'd mentioned to Raymond that I was considering early retirement to spend more time supporting Marcus's college preparation. 2 weeks after I'd talked about wanting to be more involved in his educational planning. 2 weeks after I'd started questioning why his grades seemed inconsistent with his intelligence. "They weren't just stealing Marcus's inheritance," I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. "They were systematically preventing me from discovering their deception by destroying his academic performance whenever I showed signs of increased involvement." Principal Williams's face darkened. "What do you mean?" "Every time I mentioned attending more school meetings, every time I offered to help with college applications, Marcus's behavioral problems mysteriously increased, requiring more intervention from Miss Chen and keeping me focused on damage control instead of investigation. But it gets worse." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through text messages I'd found on Raymond's hidden device. Messages between him and Wilma that revealed the true scope of their conspiracy. "Look at this," I said, showing Principal Williams the screen. Raymond texting Wilma, "Renee's getting suspicious about Marcus's grades. We need to create more behavioral incidents to keep her distracted from the real issues." And Wilma's response, "I'll document more classroom disruptions and recommend family counseling. That should make her focus on fixing Marcus instead of questioning the adoption story." Principal Williams stared at the messages, his face pale with horror. "They were coordinating to manipulate you through your son's educational crisis." "There's more," I said, scrolling to another exchange. Wilma writing, "Once we destroy his college prospects completely, Raymond can justify not paying for education, and we can use the inheritance money for our move to Florida." Not paying for education. They'd been planning to eliminate Marcus's academic future entirely, using the sabotage as justification for Raymond to abandon his financial responsibilities while stealing the money meant for his son's future. "Principal Williams, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Over the past year, when Ms. Chen has reported Marcus's problems, did her concerns seem consistent with what other teachers observed?" "No," he admitted quietly. "Several teachers have mentioned that Marcus's behavior in their classes doesn't match Ms. Chen's reports. He's been respectful, engaged, and academically strong everywhere except in situations she's documented." The validation hit me like oxygen after months of suffocation, but with clarity came rage, not the helpless frustration I'd been feeling, but the cold, analytical anger of a professional who'd been systematically manipulated. "I want copies of everything," I said, my voice taking on the authority I'd used with abusive parents. "Every altered grade, every false behavioral report, every piece of evidence." "What are you planning?" For the first time in months, I smiled with genuine confidence. "I'm going to do what I've always done, use systematic documentation to protect a child from abuse." But as I drove home with a folder full of evidence, I realized the scope of their betrayal went even deeper. They hadn't just tried to steal Marcus's inheritance, they'd tried to destroy his educational future, his self-confidence, and his relationship with me while building their escape plan. The woman who'd spent 35 years protecting children from systematic abuse had been turned into a victim in her own family. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed that maternal confusion and educational crisis would override decades of training in child advocacy, abuse detection, and systematic problem solving. They'd treated me like a naive mother instead of what I actually was, a pediatric expert with 3 decades of experience, recognizing exactly the kind of systematic manipulation they'd been using against my son. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car, looking at the house where I'd been systematically deceived for 17 years. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the confused, doubting mother they'd tried to create. I was Irene Patterson, pediatric nurse and child advocate. I'd protected vulnerable children from abusive parents, manipulative caregivers, and systematic neglect. I'd built a career fighting for children who couldn't fight for themselves. And now I was going to use every skill I'd ever learned to protect Marcus from the people who'd been systematically destroying his future while stealing his inheritance. They thought they were manipulating a naive mother. They were about to discover they'd been trying to deceive someone who'd made a career of catching people who used their authority to harm children. The child advocate was about to conduct the most important protection case of her career, one that would expose systematic educational abuse and recover everything they'd stolen from her son. The next morning, I did what I'd done for 35 years as a pediatric nurse. I built a comprehensive child protection case based on irrefutable documentation and expert testimony. But instead of protecting patients from abusive caregivers, I was gathering evidence to prosecute the systematic educational sabotage and inheritance theft that had nearly destroyed my son's future. My dining room became a child advocacy command center. Educational records organized by timeline, financial theft documentation sorted by amount, text message evidence arranged by conspiracy level. The same methodical approach that had made me a respected pediatric advocate was now focused on delivering justice for systematic child abuse and elder fraud. But I had advantages Raymond and Wilma didn't know about. Margaret, it's Renee. I need to discuss something critical before we proceed with the criminal case. Of course. What is it? I have inheritance protections Raymond doesn't know about. My mother's trust includes legal safeguards that prevent unauthorized withdrawals, $400,000 in additional assets that he can't access or steal. The silence told me Margaret understood the implications immediately. Renee, that changes everything. You have financial resources they can't manipulate, plus legal protections that will expose their theft attempts. Financial independence. For the first time in 17 years of systematic deception, I had money that Raymond couldn't steal, couldn't use to fund his affairs, couldn't redirect to pay for his escape with Wilma. There's more, Margaret. Marcus is willing to testify about the educational sabotage and provide evidence of their conspiracy. He's choosing to support me over his biological father. So you have insider testimony from the victim himself. I have Marcus's witness testimony, documented evidence of systematic grade manipulation, and recorded conversations between the conspirators spanning months of coordinated abuse. But it gets worse for them. I called Detective Morrison, who'd handled educational crimes in our county for years. Detective, this is Renee Patterson. I need to report systematic child abuse, inheritance theft, and conspiracy to commit educational fraud. Mrs. Patterson, I remember you from the hospital. What's the situation? My husband has been stealing inheritance money meant for his biological son's education while conducting an affair with the boy's guidance counselor, who's been systematically sabotaging his academic future to eliminate him as competition for their new family. Jesus, Renee. How much evidence do you have? Complete educational records showing systematic grade manipulation, financial documentation of inheritance theft, recorded conversations between the conspirators, and testimony from the 17-year-old victim who's been protecting me from their deception. Can you come in this afternoon? Bring everything? That afternoon, I drove to my former hospital, the place where I'd built my pediatric nursing reputation over 3 decades. What Raymond didn't know was that I'd maintained my professional relationships and child advocacy credentials throughout his systematic deception. Mrs. Patterson, it's wonderful to see you. My former supervisor, Dr. Martinez, said, "How are you handling Marcus's educational challenges?" Raymond mentioned he'd been having some difficulties. Educational challenges. Raymond had been preparing the narrative for when his conspiracy was exposed, positioning Marcus as someone having academic problems rather than someone being systematically abused by school officials. "I'm handling them very systematically, Dr. Martinez," I replied, settling into his office chair. "I need your help with a very serious child abuse case." "Of course. What kind of case?" "Educational sabotage designed to destroy a child's academic future while stealing his inheritance. I need expert testimony that will hold up in criminal court." Dr. Martinez's face went serious. "Renee, are you saying someone has been abusing Marcus through the educational system?" "I'm saying my husband and Marcus's guidance counselor have been systematically destroying his academic record while stealing his college fund to finance their affair and planned escape. But my most powerful weapon wasn't just evidence, it was my alliance with Marcus." "Mom, I've been thinking about everything we discussed," Marcus said when I called him that evening. "I want to do more than just testify. I want to help you build the strongest possible case against Dad and Miss Chen." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I have access to the school computer system through my student account. I can document every grade change Miss Chen has made and show the original scores before her alterations. I can prove that she's been systematically destroying my academic record." "Marcus, that would be incredibly powerful evidence." "There's more, Mom. I recorded some of the conversations between Dad and Miss Chen when they thought I wasn't listening. I have proof of them planning to use my academic failure as justification for not paying for college while they take my inheritance money to Florida. Recorded conversations, physical proof of their conspiracy that would be impossible to explain away in court." That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Marcus had revealed the truth about his parentage, and felt something I hadn't experienced in 17 years, complete control over my own family's future and legal standing. Raymond came home at his usual time, carrying the same briefcase that had contained Marcus's hidden birth certificate. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, but his voice lacked the confident manipulation he'd been using for years. "Very productive," I replied, looking up from the child protection evidence files I was organizing. "I met with Detective Morrison about child abuse charges, consulted with educational experts about systematic sabotage, and secured expert testimony from my pediatric colleagues." Raymond's face went ashen. "Child abuse charges? Systematic educational sabotage with intent to destroy a minor's future, conspiracy to commit inheritance theft, and fraud against a vulnerable child." Detective Morrison was very interested in the grade manipulation evidence and your recorded conversations with Wilma. For the first time in 28 years of marriage, Raymond looked genuinely terrified. The confident man who'd been orchestrating systematic deception looked like a criminal whose perfect child abuse scheme had been exposed by his intended victims. "Renee, we can work this out." "We are working it out through the criminal justice system and child protective services. Tomorrow morning, you and Wilma will be arrested for conspiracy to commit child abuse and systematic inheritance theft." The pediatric advocate had become the prosecutor, and the evidence was overwhelming. They tried to destroy a child's future while stealing his inheritance. Now they were about to learn what happened when child protection experts turned their skills against systematic abusers. Sunday family dinner at my house arrived with the same gathering that had facilitated 17 years of systematic deception about Marcus's parentage and inheritance theft. But this time, the conspirators didn't know they were walking into a confrontation orchestrated by someone who'd spent 35 years building child protection cases that exposed abuse and delivered justice. "Mom, you look different today," Marcus said as he walked into my dining room, where I'd set the table for what would be our last meal, as the family we'd pretended to be. "More? I'm feeling very clear today, Marcus," I replied, placing my leather briefcase on the head of the table with the same authority I'd once used in hospital case presentations. "Clearer than I've been in 17 years. Raymond entered with Wilma beside him, as they always did when she came for what he'd told me were educational consultations about Marcus's college planning. Around the table sat the same extended family members who'd watched me celebrate adoption anniversaries and pour maternal love into a child who was actually Raymond's biological son, his brother, his parents, family friends who'd known the truth but stayed silent about the systematic deception. "Before we eat," I announced, my voice carrying the professional authority that had commanded respect for 4 decades, "I have something important to share with everyone." Raymond started to interrupt. "Renee, maybe we should—" "Sit down, Raymond." The command in my voice stopped him mid-sentence. "Everyone needs to hear this." I opened my briefcase and pulled out the organized evidence files, spreading them across the table like I'd done countless times when presenting child protection cases to hospital committees. For the past 17 years, Raymond has been lying about Marcus's adoption while conducting affairs and stealing the inheritance my mother left for Marcus's education. Wilma has been systematically sabotaging Marcus's academic future while carrying Raymond's child and planning their escape to Florida. The room fell silent, but this time, the silence belonged to me. "This is Marcus's real birth certificate showing Raymond as his biological father, not an adoption agency." I held up the document. "These are financial records showing Raymond stole $380,000 from Marcus's college fund. And these are educational records showing Wilma deliberately altered Marcus's grades and sabotaged his college applications." The family members who'd watched me celebrate Marcus's adoption were now staring at Raymond and Wilma with growing horror. "But it gets worse," I continued, pulling out the recorded conversations. "Here's audio of Raymond and Wilma planning to eliminate Marcus from their lives completely so they can start fresh with their new baby using his stolen inheritance money." Marcus, who'd been silent through the revelation, finally spoke. The shock on everyone's faces was complete, but I wasn't finished delivering justice. "Detective Morrison has reviewed all evidence. Criminal charges were filed this morning for systematic child abuse, inheritance theft, and conspiracy to commit educational fraud." I looked directly at Raymond and Wilma. "The arrest warrants are being executed after dinner." But the most devastating moment came when I addressed Raymond's extended family. "For 17 years, you all watched me celebrate adoption anniversaries and pour maternal love into a child who was actually Raymond's biological son. You knew the truth, but stayed silent while I was systematically deceived about the most fundamental aspect of my family." The shame on their faces was palpable, but I wasn't done delivering accountability. "Every moment of maternal joy you witnessed was based on lies. Every celebration of our adopted family was actually me unknowingly raising Raymond's affair child, while he conducted new affairs and stole money meant for his son's education." Raymond finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "Renee, we can work this out privately." "Privately?" I stood up, my full professional authority on display. "You've been publicly deceiving me for 17 years. You used family dinners to maintain the adoption lie, while conducting affairs and stealing inheritance money. You allowed me to celebrate motherhood while systematically destroying the child's future." But the most powerful moment came when Detective Morrison arrived exactly on schedule, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers and a representative from Child Protective Services. "Renee, are these the suspects?" Detective Morrison asked, looking at Raymond and Wilma with the professional disgust reserved for people who abuse children and exploit family relationships. "Raymond Patterson and Wilma Chen," I confirmed. 17 years of systematic deception plus documented child abuse through educational sabotage. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Raymond looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: genuine recognition of exactly who he'd been trying to deceive. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Morrison began. But Raymond was staring at me with the dawning realization that he'd tried to systematically abuse a child in front of someone who'd spent her entire career detecting and prosecuting exactly that kind of harm. "Marcus," I said, turning to the 17-year-old who'd chosen me over his biological father, "you're safe now. No one will ever use your education or your future as a weapon against you again." The family dinner that had facilitated 17 years of systematic deception had just become the setting for complete justice and family protection. They'd underestimated exactly who they were trying to deceive. The pediatric nurse who'd spent 35 years protecting children from systematic abuse had just applied those same skills to prosecuting child endangerment and inheritance theft. Raymond and Wilma had tried to destroy a child's future while stealing his inheritance and deceiving his mother. Instead, they'd awakened the protective instincts of someone who'd made a career of catching people who used their authority to harm vulnerable children. The case was closed, and the verdict was decades in prison, delivered with the same precision and protective fury that had defined my career in child advocacy. 16 months later, I stood in my renovated home office, where I'd first analyzed the birth certificate that exposed Raymond's 17-year deception. But everything had changed. The woman who'd once questioned her own maternal instincts while being systematically deceived was gone, replaced by someone who'd reclaimed not just her family, but her entire sense of purpose in child protection. The legal proceedings had been swift and comprehensive. Raymond pled guilty to systematic child abuse and inheritance theft, receiving 25 years in prison plus full restitution. Wilma faced charges for educational fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to 15 years for her role in destroying Marcus's academic future. But more importantly, the entire child protection community now understood exactly what had been done to Irene Patterson and her son. "Mrs. Patterson, it's Detective Morrison," came the familiar voice on my phone. "I wanted to let you know the final restitution payment came through. $380,000 in stolen inheritance, plus $200,000 in damages and legal fees. Your case is officially closed." $580,000. Not just recovery, but justice with compound interest for systematic child abuse and family deception. "Detective, this case has become the national standard for educational abuse prosecution, hasn't it?" "Ma'am, in 23 years of criminal investigation, I've never seen a victim build such a comprehensive case against systematic child endangerment. The Department of Education is using your documentation methods to train investigators in educational fraud cases nationwide." After I hung up, I sat at my desk. The same desk where I'd organized evidence that saved Marcus's future and exposed their conspiracy. But now it held something different: correspondence from the National Center for Child Abuse Prevention, requesting my consultation on developing protocols for detecting systematic educational sabotage. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Marcus, now 18 and thriving in his first year at Harvard, holding acceptance letters and wearing the confident smile of someone whose future had been restored. "Mom, I got the scholarship results," Marcus said, running into my arms with the same enthusiasm he'd shown as a child. "Full ride to medical school. They said my advocacy essay about surviving educational abuse was the most powerful they'd ever read." Medical school. The future that Wilma had tried to destroy through systematic sabotage was now leading Marcus toward a career in protecting other children from the abuse he'd survived. "How does it feel to be the most respected child protection expert in the country?" Marcus asked, settling into my living room that no longer displayed photos of the fake family Raymond had created. "Like I'm finally using my pediatric expertise where it matters most," I said, and meant it completely. For 35 years, I protected children from abusive caregivers. Now I'm protecting families from systematic deception and educational fraud. Marcus smiled. "The American Academy of Pediatrics wants to establish the Irene Patterson Protocol for detecting child abuse through educational systems. Your case has changed how healthcare professionals approach family deception and academic sabotage." The Irene Patterson Protocol. Using the systematic abuse Marcus and I had survived to create protection for other children who might be vulnerable to educational manipulation by trusted adults. "Tell them yes," I said without hesitation. "If our experience can prevent other families from being destroyed through systematic deception and child abuse, then something meaningful will come from those 17 years of lies." That evening, my former supervisor, Dr. Martinez, came to visit. Something that happened regularly, now that the truth about our adoption was public knowledge and my professional reputation was fully vindicated. "Renee, my staff has been asking me something. They want to know how you figured out such sophisticated child abuse when even educational professionals were fooled by the systematic deception." I considered the question carefully. I stopped making excuses for inconsistencies that didn't match my pediatric knowledge and started trusting my professional instincts. 35 years of child protection taught me to recognize when adults were systematically harming children, even when those adults were family members and school officials. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. The hospital wants you to head our new Family Deception Prevention Unit. Your case has shown us how trusted adults can weaponize educational and family systems against vulnerable children. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. The woman who'd once doubted her own maternal instincts now spoke with unqualified authority about child protection and family fraud detection. My attorney, Margaret Chen, stopped by later that week. "Renee, I have to ask, how did you maintain such detailed family documentation throughout the deception? Most victims don't have nearly this level of evidence." 35 years of pediatric nursing trained me to document everything. But more than that, I learned to trust my professional instincts when family dynamics didn't make sense, even when everyone else was accepting the deception as normal adoption challenges. Margaret smiled. "The Family Court Association wants you to develop training programs for detecting systematic family fraud. Your case has changed how legal professionals approach adoption deception and inheritance theft." The ripple effects continued expanding. The National Association of School Counselors invited me to create protocols for preventing educational abuse by school officials. 3 universities requested permission to use my case in their child protection and family law curricula. The Department of Health and Human Services asked me to consult on detection methods for systematic family deception. But the most meaningful transformation was internal. The voice that had been systematically silenced through family manipulation was now stronger than ever. "If this story resonates with you," I said into my phone, recording a message for the Child Protection Program, "remember this: your parental instincts don't disappear when someone you love deceives you. Your ability to recognize child abuse doesn't diminish when family members and school officials use their authority against vulnerable children. Your right to honest family relationships doesn't expire when you become a parent through any means." I paused, thinking about the woman I'd been 16 months ago, questioning her own maternal knowledge while being systematically deceived about her son's parentage. I spent 35 years protecting children from systematic abuse and advocating for their futures. I had to learn to apply those same protective skills to my own family when the abusers were my husband and my son's guidance counselor. The people who truly love children don't use deception to manipulate parental relationships. They don't steal inheritance money meant for education. Real family protects children's futures and validates parental love. The recording would be used in training sessions worldwide, helping other parents and professionals recognize when family systems were being weaponized against children. As I hung up the phone, I realized the most profound change wasn't in my circumstances, it was in my voice. The woman who'd whispered questions about adoption inconsistencies now spoke with the authority of someone who'd survived systematic family deception and transformed it into protection for others. Raymond had tried to steal my understanding of motherhood, Marcus's educational future, and our family's financial security through 17 years of systematic lies. He'd succeeded in deceiving me for nearly 2 decades, but he'd never touched what mattered most: the child protection expertise and maternal instincts that had defined my career. In the end, those skills hadn't just exposed his conspiracy. They'd transformed me into someone who could protect other families from the same systematic deception while building the honest relationships Marcus and I had always deserved. Some people underestimate pediatric nurses at their own peril. We've spent decades learning exactly how to detect when children are being systematically harmed, even when the abusers are sleeping in our own beds and working in our children's schools.